Okay, so a couple of questions here. So you wanted to, it sounded like you were saying at the beginning that mental properties are inherently first person and subjective, while physical stuff like brain states are inherently third person and objective. So we cannot say that these two are identical in any sense. Is that a correct characterization?
It's pretty close. Yeah, there are things that are true of mental properties that are not true of physical properties. Was the point of that part?
Okay. And I
There, I
mean, it
was there. I was talking
seems
about
like,
properties, though, not substances.
sure, right. But I use the term properties here. Um, why exactly do you think a physicalist couldn't respond by saying something akin to saying that the impression that there isn't an identity between those two is because the brain just happens to have different ways of representing the same exact thing. One way is, for example, to have a set of sentences describing a physical state, right? And then another is just going to be the state and where you're actually having the experience of that brain state, right? So in that latter state, you happen to be in the brain state itself. And so you having some sort of pre linguistic sensory representation of the brain state is what allows for there to be a different mode of representation. And I'm saying that the physicalist could just say, well, the different mode of representation is what sort of creates the illusion that there is this gap between brain states and mental states, of course. How would you respond to such an argument or such a response like that?
Yeah, so I believe it was Aaron Raw said something like that in his debate. I can't remember who he was debating, but basically what he said was essentially that yeah, those alleged, we'll say, mental properties are just the ways that the brain perceives those things, and so it perceives the firing of certain C fibers as pain, and that was kind of his response. So the problem there is that the perception of the thing is not identical to the thing. And so even that explanation entails that there's a difference between the perception and the thing perceived. And that's all that's necessary in order to say that there's a difference between mental properties and physical properties. I certainly believe that when you have the taste of banana, that there are things going on in your brain that's it's communicated up there, and that's where it's processed. So I certainly agree that what you're perceiving is essentially brain states, or brain firings or whatever. So I certainly agree with that. I don't think that you actually interact with the world directly. I think you interact it through this sensory process that's ultimately processed in the brain. So that's certainly true. But the fact that there is a perception of it actually implies a distinction between the physical and the mental.
Wait, but so you want to say something like phenomenal states are known immediately, they're known directly, and they're known subjectively via this process of introspection, where the agent has privileged access to it, while brain states aren't known immediately, right? Is that the line of reasoning that you're working with when you say that the perception, the fact that there's a perception, like a first person experience, would imply that there's no identity relation? Is that what you're getting at?
So what I'm saying is that the perception of X, the actual perception of X, is not identical to X. And so if I'm perceiving certain C firing, well, my perception of the C firing is not the same as the C firing. And so that would be enough to show that there's a difference between the perception of the C firing and the C firing itself. And that's what I'm trying to say is that there's a difference between the perception and the thing perceived. And so that response saying that this is just how we perceive the brain states, that actually is what I'm saying is that we're perceiving the brain states, that these aren't identical to the brain states, that they are the perceptions of those brain states.
Okay, but yeah, but to argue that they aren't identical, right? It's just to say, to claim that, obviously this version of physicalism, namely identity theory, is false, right? And it sounded like the reason that you gave for why there isn't going to be an identity relation was because of that distinction between phenomenal states and brain states, where you said brain states are public, right? Phenomenal states are private. So, in other words, I have like immediate and direct acquaintance with my phenomenal states in a way where other people don't have access, while brain states do not. But it just seems to me when you run that sort of line of reasoning, it seems like you're committing some sort of like intentional fallacy where you're going to assume that if there are two or more names that can refer to the same entity, that they can just be freely substituted with one another in a situation where that just isn't the case.
I don't know that I've said that. What I've said is that there are a number of different, I gave 8 examples of things that can be true of mental properties that are not true of physical properties, such as being vague or pleasurable. And so, your response seemed to be, yeah, but what if those properties, those different qualia, are just the way that we're perceiving the brain states? And so my response there was to say, well, right, but that is what I'm saying. That entails that there's a difference between our perception of the brain states and the brain states themselves. And so
But
that's not actually a disagreement. That is agreeing with what I'm saying.
to
There's a
say,
difference.
well, no, but to say that you have a perception, they could just say what it is to have a perception of the brain state is just to token a particular physical state or a physical constituent in the brain that allows for quality. So you're still like referring to the same like token mental state, but they just want to say that nothing nothing that you're referring to there isn't covered by the physical ontology of the thing that leads to experience.
Yeah. So I wonder if our misunderstanding here is in taking these to be reasons to say that there's a mental substance. Because that part of the discussion wasn't disagreeing that the substance that has those properties is the brain.
Is right.
It
Is
was just
physical.
saying that those properties are not physical properties, that the property of being pleasurable isn't a physical property. And so it's not identical to a particular arrangement of electrons, that there's a difference. And that's why a lot of philosophers have, even atheistic philosophers have said, have adopted property dualism to say, look, yeah, it seems like there's a difference between mental properties and physical properties. And some of them will just say, yeah, but it's just the brain that has those mental properties. And that's all that I was saying in that part of the discussion, is that there's a difference between mental and physical properties, which, again, if you are a physicalist, it's consistent with saying that the brain has those properties. It's just to say that they're different than physical properties.
Wait, but I don't understand. So is your reason for that? So when you claim that they aren't the same thing, are you just making some sort of claim, like some sort of like a posteriori knowledge claim that you just know this after experience, like after investigating these things empirically, or are you just making some? Are you just saying that these things are just built into your concept of mental and physical properties?
Uh, I'm not sure what you mean there. I mean, I've given different observations that we make of our mental states, such as them being internal,
I'm just
immediate, and private, and what it is like, and that they're vague or pleasurable, and that's not true of physical properties. And so, I don't know what you mean by being empirical. I don't know how that would
I'm just
relate.
saying, like, is your claim going to be one where, um, like, it's some sort of synthetic? You're saying that those things aren't synthetically identical, right? So, and like, there's some empirical fact that you want to appeal to in order to say that those things can't be identical to one another, or are you just saying that this is just a conceptual truth that just follows from the meanings of the terms mental and physical, that they can't be the same?
Well, it's not a semantic argument. It's that, so for example, let's say that you have two photographs and they're and you want to know, is the object in the photograph, are these two photographs showing me the same thing, or are they showing me different things? Well, what you would do is you would look for differences between the two photographs. And if you find that one photograph has something about that object that's different than the object in the second photograph, then you say, okay, well, these are two objects, not one object. And so that's what I'm trying to show here is, well, there are things that are true of mental properties that are not true of physical properties. And so that's enough to show that mental properties are not physical properties. Because if they were physical properties, then there wouldn't be things that are true of mental properties that are not true of physical properties. But I'll go ahead and give you the last word there, and then I've got friction in line here.
It just seems like, so I don't understand. So there are like different ways in which I think this whole concern that you have over phenomenal states can be resolved under physicalism. One, namely, where you could hold to some sort of like grounding functionalist view. I don't know if you're familiar with some of the work that Schaefer has with that, but the basic idea is that you could basically posit this like notion of metaphysical grounding that he has, and you could sort of say, as long as A and B are not like linked in a way where B just follows from a priori. So in other words, B is not deducible from a priori. There's going to be some causal link between mental state A, right, and some sort of property that's picked out by the physical constituents B, right? And so if there's some sort of like realizer mental state, then you could have in principle some sort of like, let's just say that Matt is your name.
Yes.
Can I refer to you, Matt?
Matt, yeah.
That Matt has a C fiber firing, right? Well, the C fiber firing, how we encounter as to whether or not you would actually be in pain, right, is something which is epistemically opaque, right? We don't know exactly all the entailments that follow from us holding to the view that C fiber firings are identical to the experience of pain, right? But the epistemic opacity there doesn't show that those things are ontologically underdetermined, that seems to be your line of reasoning, is that, well, we don't know all the set of mental descriptions which could be satisfied by physical terms. And so therefore it seems like the mental is going to be ontologically underdetermined by the physical states. And I'm saying that that's a leap where a lot of non-physicalists like yourself seem to presume. Like Chalmers, for example, seems to make that sort of presumption as well with the explanatory gap. So I just wanted to conclude with that. That's all.
Okay. Well, yeah, thank you for those comments. Thank you for listening. If you found this helpful, please like and subscribe. Please also look at the show notes in order to find a link to our group so that you can join our next discussion. I look forward to chatting with you.